Welcome to the Pretty Powerful Podcast, where powerful women are interviewed every week to share real inspiring stories and incredible insight to help women or anyone break the barriers, be a part of innovation, shatter the glass ceiling, and dominate to the top of their sport, industry, or life's mission. Join us as we celebrate exceptional women and step into our power. And now, here's your host, Angela Gennari.
Hello, and welcome to the Pretty Powerful Podcast. My name is Angela Gennari, and I am sitting here with Miss Martha Lackritz-Peltier. Thank you so much for joining us, Martha.
Thank you so much for having me. It's such an honor.
Well, this is a pleasure to have you because you have such an incredible resume, and I'm super excited for our audience to learn a little bit more about you. So Martha is NGOsource's General Manager. She oversees NGOsource's legal operations and ensures the program's continued alignment with best practices. Martha is deeply engaged in formulating and advocating for more streamlined and localized due diligence processes, similar to the NGOsource model. She is a regular speaker at conferences on topics such as U.S. tax law rules around global giving, due diligence, humanitarian aid, data privacy, and international philanthropy. Martha is also TechSoup's General Counsel. Prior to joining NGOsource, Martha worked at a law firm, Adler and Calvin, where she counseled nonprofit and tax-exempt organizations and donors, with an emphasis on international grant-making, advocacy, corporate governance, and charitable solicitation. Prior to this, Martha clerked for the Honorable Chief Justice Wallace Jefferson, interned for Nina Tottenberg at NPR in Washington, D.C., lived in Vietnam under a Fulbright grant, and worked as a freelance journalist. Wow, how do you have the time? This is amazing. She has authored numerous articles and blog posts on federal law regulations, nonprofit compliance, and international law. Martha holds a bachelor's degree from Brown University and a JD from UC Berkeley Law School. She is a member of both the Texas and California state bars. Martha also was named the 2019 Outstanding Young Nonprofit Attorney by the American Bar Association. In 2020, she was named a Choral Women in Leadership Fellow. In her free time, she volunteers for local nonprofit organizations and is a proud Oakland resident. Wow, what an incredible story. I am so excited. So you have done so much already. Like it's amazing. So let's get started. So how did you get into the nonprofit side of law? It's such a unique niche.
Yeah, and I have to say, there are no lawyers in my family. I am never would have dreamt that I would become a lawyer. When people ask me, "Oh, is your husband a lawyer?" I'm always like, "God, no! Like one is enough." So not. I'm a reluctant lawyer in some way. But I was, as you mentioned in my bio, I did. I actually studied literature in college. I went lived abroad for a number of years and worked as a journalist, and became involved writing about social justice issues. And I felt like I had this idea: I'm going to get a master's in creative writing. I'm going to be even more in debt, and then what am I going to do with it?
Right.
And I at some point I decided, well, maybe I'll go to law school, because then I can actually approach sort of advocacy and writing with a more informed lens. I can learn about how social justice issues are actually litigated and resolved, and maybe use that skill in a writing career.
Wow.
So I went to law school and had an amazing time, because it felt like an intellectual exercise. It was never like, I need to go to this law firm, I need to become a lawyer. It didn't have any of those expectations. And then by the time when I graduated, and this was during this was in 2009, and one of the many great recessions, essentially. Yeah. There weren't a lot of opportunities for me other than going into the law. I think there's this kind of a myth that like you can do anything with a law degree, or at one point there was a myth that I had that in my mind, and really you're trained to be a lawyer. And so, on the one hand, I loved studying constitutional law. I loved clerking for a justice, but my heart wasn't necessarily in being a traditional lawyer. And so I ended up finding this law firm in San Francisco that is the largest firm, that is a boutique law firm only practicing nonprofit tax exempt law. I happened to know someone who was working there. I reached out. I thought, well, okay, this is kind of being a lawyer, but in a way that interests me, that's related to, policy and social justice issues, because I'd be working with nonprofits. And so ended up at that law firm and really fell in love with, of all things, tax law, a very
Yeah.
specific area of the tax law. It's for organizations that don't pay taxes.
Right.
But yeah, so that's what sort of led me to that. And I haven't regretted it. And going in-house at TechSoup as an attorney there has continued to sort of feed my desire to do more than just practice law in the traditional sense, but do things all around legal concepts and legal compliance, including things like due diligence and vetting charities, which is a big part of what I do now.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Okay. So yeah, so I was loving this as we're reading about all of this, and you're interning and you're clerking and you're going to Vietnam, you're in Vietnam. And it's just like this incredible amount of experience that you have. And I love that you have this focus on social justice, because I feel like anyone going into law, you are given such a gift with a law degree to be able to really move the needle and do things in an area that you're passionate about. So that's just, to me, my dream when I was younger was to go to law school and become a prosecutor. And then at one point I had changed it to, I think I want to go to law school and maybe, work on advocacy on behalf of those who can't speak for themselves, the environment, children, people who are voiceless in an arena where money talks, right? And so I just wanted to be like this, bulldog badass attorney who just went after, who spoke up for the ones who couldn't speak. And it's really what you're doing. Like, you really are just helping people through this very confusing world of, giving and charities and nonprofits, and, what tax implications are there. And I love that you're using, your law degree to fuel your passion for social justice. So amazing. Good for you.
Thank you. And well said. Yeah. I think if one has the privilege of going to law school, it's an expensive endeavor. It's a major, it's 3 years of your life. I think that one has to be privileged to be able to even do that. And then I think you have a kind of an obligation, even if one's full-time job is not, in the nonprofit sector or the public sector, there are reasons that attorneys are highly encouraged to do pro bono work and pay annual, contributions to access to justice, within the state bars. But anyway,
well, good.
Come off my soapbox. We're aligned.
Oh no, it's good. Get on your soapbox. This is the platform. this is the audience you want to share it with. Because I think we're all on the same page here. So tell me a little bit, what made you go into tax law specifically, and how is it, what are the implications of tax law when it comes to nonprofits? Because, like you kind of just touched on, it's an industry that really doesn't pay taxes. So, it's confusing.
Yeah,
obviously.
Yeah, no, I mean, I have trouble doing my own taxes. So it seems odd to call myself a tax lawyer. I think what's interesting is, why is it that the tax code governs organizations that don't pay taxes? Yep. And the reason is you have to jump through a lot of hoops in order to not pay taxes. And so there's this whole set of regulations around any kind of organization, whether it's a charity, a foundation, a labor union, a trade association, a civic league. There are all kinds of nonprofit organizations that are not your traditional charities that don't pay taxes. A PAC, political groups, right? These are all different kinds of organizations that don't pay taxes. And so in order to even be recognized to that extent and maintain that tax exempt status, there's a whole set of rules and chapters in the tax code that say, this is what you can do. This is what you can't do. If you're going to do this, then you have to also do this, right? And so that's where, as a tax exempt lawyer, my interest was in, there is something that I like about the tax code, which is there's lots of gray areas, but there's a lot of black and white. There are tons of rulings. There's a lot of I think it is an area of the law where, and I probably will have tax lawyers telling me, what are you talking about? It's so nuanced and difficult, because of course it is. Right. On the other hand, there are pieces of it that are very satisfying, that are almost logical and delineated so clearly, because when you take tax and lawyers and accountants and bring them together, you get like way more detail than one would ever need.
Right.
And so, I think there is a beauty in that, but I think, having counsel that can help organizations understand, like, how do we make sure that we don't lose that tax exempt status? What are the steps we have to do? Are we allowed to go out and lobby Congress for a change for something that we care about, or are we not? And, are we, if we make a grant, are we allowed to, say that the recipient, or receive a contribution? Can we tell the recipient they can take a tax deduction or not? Right. I mean, there's just a myriad number of laws that work around that. within tax exempt law, there are also lots of specialties, right? There are attorneys that specialize in advising the grant makers themselves. There are attorneys that specialize in advising, political groups, say, social welfare organizations. And by focusing on international philanthropy as a particular niche area, I going back to this social justice idea is that I have this enormous privilege of working with a vast array of organizations doing amazing things around the world, and have this small sort of behind the scenes role in helping to make sure that keeps working, that they keep getting the resources that they need in a way that isn't particularly sexy, but I find endlessly fascinating and incredibly important, right? It's the paperwork and dotting the I's, and sometimes people don't care until you get audited and you realize, oh my God, I guess some of these rules are important. So, it's fun. I think it's nerdy fun, the work I do, but it's also satisfying because of the exposure I get. I get to see organizations fighting for trans rights in East Africa, and organizations working on, First Amendment issues in Eastern Europe. And I mean, just the whole gamut of people that are passionate about what they're doing. Yeah. And I get to just sort of see that and be around it and help them do the things that they're amazing at, all the things they do, but they don't know the little tax rules. And then that's where I can come in and say, oh, I can help you on this.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, good. So tell me a little bit more about what NGOsource is, because is that part of TechSoup or not part of TechSoup?
Yeah, it's a great question. So it is a program of TechSoup. It was launched in 2013. It was initially the Council on Foundations, which is this U.S. sort of trade group almost. It's a charity of grant makers within the U.S. They come together and they talk about things like, how can we make giving more fair and transparent and equitable, and how can we help each other and our grantees? And they had identified in 2008 that there was this tax law compliance issue that was costing tons of money in duplication. And they wanted to figure out a way to make it more streamlined. And so they put together an RFP in 2008, along with a bunch of other funders, saying, we're looking for a charity that will house a repository of vetted nonprofits that multiple funders can go in and access. And so the idea was, right now, funder, X foundation, B foundation, D foundation, we all want to give to this charity in Ukraine. And each of us has our own vetting process, and each of us reaches out to that charity, and each of us says, we need you to do this, we need you to do this, we need a copy of your board documents, we need your financial policies, and the charity in Ukraine, say, is doing it 3 different times for 3 different funders, right? And it's using a ton of their time. The funders are each hiring their own attorneys, and they're paying their own attorneys to do it. And so the idea was, how can we create a unified repository housed within a charity itself, so that it doesn't become a commercial tool that can be used to sort of get money out of people only, right? And to house and maintain a repository over the years that will become large enough that multiple funders can come to it and pay really a fraction of the price, and the organizations on the other end of it are only having to go through the exercise once. And so that was sort of the birth of the NGOsource program. TechSoup responded to the RFP, they received it, and then spent the next 5 years building it, working with the Treasury to make sure that we had the compliance mechanisms in place, that it would be acceptable to them, because the idea of a unified repository that could reutilize vetted organizations was new. And so that was how NGOsource was born out of TechSoup. So we're very much a program of TechSoup. Because it is a program based on due diligence tax law standards, the vetting that we issued are actually legal opinions. As General Counsel of TechSoup, I also manage that program because of its sort of legal function. It was initially also, it really drew me to TechSoup. The program is very well regarded, and when I left private practice to join TechSoup, it was really to be a part of NGOsource. So it is a big part of what I do as General Counsel.
Awesome. So NGO, just so people understand, it's non-governmental organization, correct? And so it's basically how nonprofits are referred to internationally. Am I on the right track?
Exactly.
With that?
Yes. Okay. Thank you for clarifying that. Yeah.
Yeah, because it was confusing to me when I started reading about NGOs, because I'm like, well, I don't understand what an NGO is, but really it's just how everyone refers to a nonprofit around the world, except for the US, kind of like the metric system versus so it's we have our own verbiage for everything, but NGO is really it's a nonprofit organization. So
and it's interesting too, because often they are very connected to the government, right? I mean, there are nonprofits that get tons of government grants, but it is interesting because I think there's a sense of like, no, we need to be seen as separate to be sort of pure, but it's all, it's, I think it's very blended. What we often like to say now, since you raised it, is civil society, because civil society really does incorporate, if you think of a group like Black Lives Matter, who was actually not an incorporated entity because they chose not to be incorporated because they wanted to make, for whatever the reasons are. And the point is, so what do you call that? Is it not a nonprofit? It's civil society because they're serving a public good. And there are tons of examples of that all over the world where, another example is, say, in a country where they have very anti-humanitarian laws, or they don't have LGBTQ rights, and an organization fighting for LGBTQ rights cannot actually register as an NGO because they would be formally recognized, right? So you have this whole spectrum of civil society. Within that, NGOs is the commonly used term.
Okay, very cool. So, my first real glimpse into the international NGO world was many years ago. I read a book called Half the Sky. Have you ever heard of this book?
No.
So Half the Sky, I know. So Half the Sky was written by two New York Times writers who would travel around the world and bring back these international stories of, how do I say this? Very small organizations, or one person who's doing something to really change their community, really. So it was really like a kind of a grassroots organization that's just kind of putting themselves out there. You have one woman who had been, sex trafficked her whole life, and she's decided she was going to fight back and save these children who are being sex trafficked. And so she has her own little, very small organization that's saving lives. And so it's her story. And then it's somebody's story in India who was, burned, because a lot of the women, if they're caught, having any kind of affair or something like that, they will throw acid or something and burn them. So they call it bride burning. And they have, in Africa, there's multiple, and most of it is women, who are started these organizations, and it's fighting for women's rights. And the reason it's called Half the Sky is there is I think, and I apologize, I know I'm slaughtering this entire description, but basically there's a proverb in China, and it says women hold up half the sky, right? And so it's just the importance of women. And so they would bring back these stories to the New York Times, and the New York Times was not publishing them. And they were getting so frustrated. They're like, it's not financial, it's not this, it's not this. And they just thought nobody cared. Nobody cares what's happening in some small village in Africa. Nobody cares what's happening in, some very poor area of India. Nobody cares. And they were saying, like, these stories need to be heard. Like, there are people out there doing really, really incredible things. Why aren't we telling their stories? And so the reason I'm bringing this up is because, if you wanted to, because in the time that I was reading this, I was like, why aren't we doing something? Like, it lit a fire, and I'm like, we need to go save these women. But they have a list of the organizations, but I don't even know the very first, I don't even know where to start in terms of like donating to them. How do I give to them? Is this a tax deduction? Is it not a tax deduction? It's international. I don't even know where to go, so you're dealing with very small organizations. It's not like you're giving to this large global organization. These are small community organizations. And how do you even start? And so that's a question for you now.
Yes, no, Angela, I love this question. I love this story. I'm going to find this book. You said it. So, this really touches on something that is a big part of what I'm working on now, which is a due diligence program that is focused on small grassroots organizations that are delivering resources on the ground.
Yes.
So this is what you say is even, a microcosm of the bigger picture of major development funders, right? If you look at like a USAID or, the European Union or United Nations who are making grants, they have so many restrictions on the funds. They have so many due diligence requirements that the only possible grant recipients of those funds are the Red Crosses and the Oxfams, which are fabulous organizations, right?
Sure.
But the very large, sophisticated international NGOs. And those are the only organizations really eligible to be receiving funds. And by the same token, are the only ones that are sort of visibly out there for individual donors, right? We hear about a disaster or a crisis. Right. And it's kind of like their top 3 organizations that we want to give to because we trust them or because we've heard their name and, right. But in reality, and this is and again, I want to be really clear that this is not it isn't because those international NGOs are bad or wrong or being,
Sure.
villainous or hiding the funds, but ultimately, the actors on the ground, those local actors, those small groups, those grassroots actors, those community organizations who are there all the time, not just during the time of a disaster, right? Those are the ones who are actually delivering the goods, who are actually serving those communities, who understand those communities, and they're totally invisible. Yeah. And in terms of the funds, studies have shown that it's less than 2% of the total funds that are granted from foundations and from governments is actually reaching them. Again, not because it's bribery or corruption. It's insane. And but really because of these kind of compliance requirements is a huge part of it, because everybody has to shoulder a little bit of the liability. So you have this giant international NGO that says, we'll take this $10 million grant, we will process it, which is complicated, and they have to make sure they have all their lawyers looking at it, and then they give it to their sub-grantee, who is at a regional level, who then does all of their processing, and they also need to take a part of those sums because it has to pay for all of the work that they're doing, who then so on and on until the bottom of the chain. And there needs to be a way for both individual donors, but also governments who give these multi-million and billion-dollar grants to be able to just give those funds directly to the groups on the ground.
Right.
So the program that I've been really involved in for the past few years, which is a sort of an offshoot of NGOsource at TechSoup, is how do we solve this problem using due diligence? Right. And so we're developing this program, which is, let's go find all of those, not all of those, but many local actors and local organizations who are delivering services, and let's put them through, let's sort of vet them. Let's determine, do they meet the kind of requirements that donors are asking for, whether it's an individual donor who may have very few requirements. We just want to know that you're a legitimate organization. To, USAID, who needs them to sign 50 different certifications and have 10 different procurement policies and all of these processes in place. We're putting them through a sort of vetting process to see, do you have this? Do you have this? Do you have this? Do you have this? And then we go back to them and we say, this is where you're really strong. This is where donors are going to look for additional evidence. And then we're going to connect you with the resources that can help you get those. And so this program that we call it STEP, is about, it's two-tiered. One is creating a repository of vetted organizations specifically focused on small grassroots local organizations in the global South. But the second aspect of it is, how do we then use that vetting process to immediately resource them with the tools and the compliance processes they need, so that the next time a donor comes to them, they can say, oh yeah, actually we do have a policy that covers, how we distribute cash, right? And they're able to check those boxes and start becoming visible to those big funders. Because one of the things we're finding is that, this problem that I'm talking about, less than 2% of the funds getting to the ground, people know, United Nations is aware of this problem, and funders are and they want to get around it, but even they don't know how to do it, right? They're like, we know that this is what's happening. We don't know how to reach them. We don't know how to give them funds. We don't know how to. So a lot of work needs to be done, but I think that there is, just the difficulty of all of the layers of compliance and risk management that we put on the transferring of funds, which have really grown over the years, in particular since 9/11, because we have all the anti-terrorist regulations, right? Like there's a good reason why we want to make sure we know what you're doing with that money, right? Yes. Particularly in war-torn and conflict zones, where there's even more, potentially likely that those funds could be abused. So it's kind of trying to break through all of that red tape. Again, not delegitimizing it or not saying it isn't important. We're still, we're trying to build up the compliance of those smaller organizations, build some transparency into the process so that they actually know how to comply and can become more eligible for those funds, so that, these, in this half the sky narrative that you were talking about, those groups can actually be visible to funders and build up their compliance and their capacity to receive larger kinds of resources.
Oh, that's amazing. Okay. So because one of the big things that they talk about in this book is the reason that a lot of these grassroots organizations exist is because some of these smaller communities don't trust big organizations. And so the people who are actually getting the work done, like you might have the UN come in or some big organization come in, but it's on such a, it's not at the scale where they're connecting with the real true people who need the money. Right. And so like they're doing something on a larger scale, but it is so, I don't know, can I say sanitized? Where they're not really getting in there and getting into the nitty gritty of what needs to happen, saving lives and getting out there and, sure, they'll do the, Doctors Without Borders and all of these really great organizations, and I'm not discounting them at all. But when you have someone who is, physically taking a young girl out of a house who's being sex trafficked and, kind of kidnapping her away and bringing her back to her family, like, a lot of big organizations aren't touching that. They're not touching that. It's too risky.
Yeah.
So it's these grassroots organizations. It's these really small ones who are connected in their communities. You have to know what's going on. They're not, these doors aren't open to everybody. This is a very small community of people who know what's happening behind the scenes, and they're doing something to make a difference in people's lives. But they also may not have the sophistication and the resources to make it to these larger organizations to say, hey, we need help, And so that's the part that there's the huge disconnect, because the people who really are making all the difference don't necessarily have a team of attorneys, and they don't necessarily have a team of grant writers and people who are backing them. I mean, because, and similar to what I say about entrepreneurs, sometimes we get so busy working in our business that we forget to work on our business. And it's the same thing, it's the same thing with a nonprofit.
Absolutely.
If you're out there and your goal is to really change lives and to do something really significant, you may not even really consider yourself a nonprofit. You need resources, but you don't consider yourself an organization as much as, I just need money to be able to save, these 10 more victims. I need housing, I need food, I need resources, I need medical care. And you don't know where to go. Because, at the end of the day, you don't have that kind of platform foundation to be able to reach back out to and say, hey, look, this is where we need help. And you don't have, necessarily the connections to do that. So
yeah,
I love
absolutely.
that you're trying to reach them. I love that there's a plan in place to reach them.
Yeah, it's a long way to go. I think the other thing is, when we talk about working on their mission. I mean, completely. I mean, people that are out there working in their communities, understandably, are not wanting to get in front of a computer and spend their whole day responding to a compliance questionnaire.
Right.
And you have a limited set of resources, and you want to put those resources into going down into the field and doing something.
Yeah.
By the same token, when you do have a donor, their donors aren't going in and saying, we want to pay for you to get an attorney, we want to pay for you to clean up your paperwork. No, we want to pay for the orphanage that you're building. We want to pay for the scholarships for the kids. Right. And so I think, a program that actually does walk them through, we're going to give you these resources. We're going to help you figure out how to do this so that you don't have to try to figure it out yourself, is also because that very exercise in and of itself is rarely funded. So,
Well, I love that. So what is the UN Grand Bargain? Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah. And, this talks very directly about the issue that I was talking about funds being trickled down. So this was a group of funders, and it was the largest funders internationally, who in 2016, and it included most of the UN agencies, several very large private funders like the Gates Foundations and other known funders, who came together in 2016 and sort of said, we have lots of problems happening with global philanthropy and humanitarian aid, and how can we work together to fix these? Wonderfully noble idea. They came together with a set of commitments. It was signed by all of these funders, and over the years, more signatories have joined. And one of their major commitments was, now again, this was in 2016, was by 2020, we want 25% of all funds going directly to local actors. Wow. So as I was saying before, like, this is a known problem, and powerful resourced groups are coming together and have come together to say, we want to solve this. And here we are in 2022, and we're at about 2%. We're not anywhere near 25%. So, and they're continuing to work toward it. And the Grand Bargain is, a group that continues to grow and add signatories and to revise sort of how they can meet that plan. So it continues to have an incredibly noble mission. But really this is, I think, it's a little bit of a failure of the Grand Bargain right now that needs to be sort of re-envisioned, and maybe it was too ambitious, but, I think it's incredibly important that was called out, and that it was sort of, these groups came together to say, this is a problem we need to fix. I think we still don't really know how to get there, apparently, so.
The intention is good, but the execution is where it's lacking, right? So intentions versus execution. I think that's a huge factor in every business, right? Like, we can all go in with good intentions, but it's all in the execution. So So tell me a little bit more about tax law, U.S. tax laws related to global giving. If I were to donate to an NGO, let's just say in a small village in Africa, how do I write that up? How do I put that in my tax statement? Is that a donation? Is it not a donation? Is it a write-off? Like how do you even
Yeah.
manage?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, and that's another tricky thing I think is tax deductibility rules make it
Yeah,
certainly, or push us to give in certain areas, which is perfectly understandable. If you're not going to pay tax on a donation, then the U.S. wants you to make that donation to a charity in the States. So I think that it's much easier to determine if you're giving it to a recognized 501(c)(3) organization in the
right.
US. If it's outside of the US, there are a few ways to do this. I think one of the, just in the past 10 or 15 years, the rise of these kind of global giving type groups that operate and donor advised funds. Network for Good is a great example of, you can go onto a website and essentially they're acting as they operate donor advised funds, which is a tax law mechanism in which they are themselves a charity.
Uh-huh.
You make a donation to them, and you are essentially making a recommendation that they make that grant to a third party. And
Oh,
so what
interesting.
happens is, yeah, you're giving to a 501(c)(3) nonprofit in the US.
Right.
You are strongly recommending that they give that to a third party that you are naming.
Uh-huh.
As a legal matter, they have the right to say, nah, we're not going to, right?
Uh,
But that's not going to happen because that's a business model that no one is going to want to give to.
right, right.
But what they actually have to do is, okay, we understand that you want to give that charity in India. We now have to do due diligence to figure out whether it is actually appropriate to give to that organization. And so we'll accept the liability for if it's not a charity, say, and we'll make the donation. You get a tax donation, even for a $5 gift or a $5,000
Sure.
gift. And then we re-grant it on your behalf. It's a great tool. Donor advised funds have been growing immensely. And what a lot of people don't realize is, I think when you hear about donor advised funds, you think of the large financial institutions like Fidelity and Charitable, who you have very wealthy donors who can create donor advised funds to move their charitable gifts.
Right.
But it's also functions for very small donations. Like I said, Network for Good is a very commonly known tool, which people might not realize. They're all mini donor advised funds. It relies on the exact same tax function. Another great way to give internationally is with local community foundations.
Okay.
So most states and most regions and many cities, right, have whether it's the San Francisco Community Foundation or the Boston Community Foundation or Silicon Valley Community Foundation is the largest one in the States. They also operate donor advised funds. So that's another great way to give. You're giving locally. A small percentage of that goes into your community because they're a community foundation that serves the community. And then
Okay.
they also will often re-grant internationally. And community foundations they do use NGOsource quite a bit because the vetting service that we provide does allow them to rely on our vetting, so that if you go to your Oklahoma Community Foundation and you say, I really want to give to this Indian orphanage,
Yeah.
they go to NGOsource. They have us do the vetting of that entity, and then they can say, great, somebody else has vetted this for us already. It's in their repository. And so, I think this idea of NGOsource, this repository of vetted organizations, it really does sort of have this ripple effect of, it's not just the big foundations that rely on it, but it's the donor advised funds who are then able to open up international giving to their clients and individual donors. To the United Ways of the World Employee Giving groups like that,
Yeah.
use NGOsource as well. It is a single organization that is getting these vetted certifications, but it's enabling all of these individual donors to then be able to give to their local community foundation or donor advised fund and get a tax deduction.
Interesting. Okay, fascinating. So let's just say I wanted to open the gate and say, I want to donate to this organization because they're doing some really great work in, Thailand, right? And so I decide I'm going to send a check to an organization in Thailand. I send them money. Are there any concerns as far as data privacy, anything like that you should be concerned about when it comes to international giving?
Yeah, what a great question. Obviously, it varies widely from country to country.
Sure.
One of the things that people might not realize is, in certain countries, giving to an entity could actually cause problems for the recipient. And I'm not saying this to discourage giving, but
sure.
I'll use China as an example, which in 2016, China passed a very comprehensive, it's called the ONGO law, the basically overseas NGO law, which was really one effort to sort of control who receives gifts from outside the US, right? They didn't want to see tons of money going into human rights groups that could potentially oppose the government, right? And so this law essentially said any organization within nonprofit organizations in China that's receiving funds from abroad they can't even receive those funds if they aren't registered with us, right?
Wow.
So this is an extreme example of a government really trying to control the kind of activity that civil society undergoes, but doing it in a way that really does stifle philanthropy. And now those are rare cases, but I'll just call out that, worth even just a Google search, like, are there laws against receiving nonprofit, in a certain country, Thailand, for example, does not have those. It's all good to give in Thailand. So there's one, I think the consequences that could come to the organization is worth calling out. I think the other thing I would point out is, I would only give to an organization with whom someone has some understanding or credibility, whether it's, however that may be, whether it's through an individual, maybe you were on a trip somewhere and you interacted with them. However it is, like, I think having that assurance is important, because it is important to note that we do have these anti-terrorism regulations. And if you end up giving to someone and it turns out they're a terrorist, you could go to prison. Right. So, so feel somewhat confident that you're not going to be a terrorist. I think there are those kind of, again, these are rare situations. I'm not trying to raise too many red flags. Other than that, I think, best practices where one would use any time that they're wiring funds, right? You're not going to want to share too much confidential information. Best to go through financial institutions. Typically wiser to give to an organization as opposed to an individual's bank account. Although, having said that, lots of situations where an organization isn't able to access a bank account, right? I mean, it's very tricky. I also think, depending on how much you're giving, okay, maybe I just gave $5 to somebody who totally scammed me on the street.
Right.
I think I can live with it. Do you know what I mean? Like, I think, and maybe you're giving $50 to a charity that you believe in, and there's a small chance that maybe it's not real, and maybe that's okay, and maybe you just go on living your life. Do you know what I mean? I think there's a huge nuance there, and I'm not trying to scare people away from giving, which is what I'm worried is will end up being conveyed. But I wouldn't think more than those basic. Okay, I'm transferring funds abroad. The same steps that you might take in any other situation where you're transferring funds to another country.
Okay, very good. Awesome. All right. Well, good advice. So, and I'm a big believer also in volunteering. So I, not just, sending money, but time. I feel like time is our most valuable resource, way more important than money sometimes. And, but putting time in is important too. So I am a fan of anybody who's putting themselves in a position to help others. And I love what you're doing. I think that's so amazing. So kudos to you for spending your career devoted to serving others. I love that so much. So,
well, thank you.
Yes, absolutely. So what would you tell your 18-year-old self?
Oh, God.
What advice would you give to
what a great question.
18-year-old you?
I mean, there's so much advice I want to give, right? Like, what would I not say? This is one of those things that maybe you can only get with age, right? But like, confidence is so much more important than anything else. Yes. Like and that's what I'm like, you can't tell someone to be confident, right? They have to get there. But why does it take us, and particularly women, right? I mean, I think we spend so much of our lives, and some of us our entire lives, so focused on what people think of us, what we look like. And all of the rest is kind of a nice to have, right? Like, and then you realize at a certain age, like, no, actually none of that does really matter. But like being confident and caring about yourself and loving yourself, like everyone feels that around you, right? That's what moves people. I just feel, and again, I think this is all women. I mean, all people. But in particular women. I think the insecurities that we enable in us, and that society enables, and that just fuel everything we do in ways that we think about what we could do if we were able to release those insecurities sooner in our lives.
Yes, absolutely. But it's funny. So, and that's a great segue into my next question. So as women, we often give our power away. So often, we give credit to somebody else when we did all the work, or we compliment somebody for something that, it's probably due to us, but, we give them the credit, or we allow somebody to take our power away. We allow somebody to criticize us or do something that was just so unwarranted, and we don't stand up for ourselves. So, I mean, so often in life, we give our power away. And I think that it's not unique to only women, for sure. But I think by and large, we do it much more frequently than men do. So tell me about a time that you gave your power away and then another time that you stepped into your power. And what was the difference between those times?
Yeah, as you're talking, it reminds me. So I grew up. I, it was funny. I'm sure a lot of us saw the there was a Facebook meme a few years ago, and I'm sure it's much older than that, which is, stop calling little girls bossy, instead say,
Oh,
you're like a CEO or something
yeah,
like that,
yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah,
Um, and my brother forwarded it to me and said something like, my sister's been a CEO since she came out of the womb. You know what I mean? Like,
yep.
yeah, proudly, right? But it was like, but I think and this goes back to like by looking at one's former self.
Sure.
I spent, I would say, like the first 10 to 12 years of my life being very outspoken,
Yep.
and literally I was like, I will be the first female president, and you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then spending, I would say, most of my teenage years trying to push that down and
Yeah.
trying to be like, oh no, this isn't appropriate. This is not, nobody likes this. No,
Yep.
this is,
Yep.
you're not supposed to be the smartest one in the room. You're not, right.
Mhm.
And I think that profoundly changed my personality. That took me years to sort of
Yeah.
find my true self.
Yes, I
Um,
know.
and
Totally
and so
relate.
it's more of a, I'm sure, right? I think this is, I
Hmm.
love talking to women about this because it's always like, yes. um,
Yeah.
but I think it was only very recently that I started like using the word ambition, or like encouraging other women to use the word ambition, and to just say like, you're ambitious, and then to say like, because I say, how do I say I really want to succeed but I don't, and I'm like, you're ambitious, and that's a
Yeah.
good thing.
Yeah.
Like, that's
Yeah.
not a bad word. It's not
Right.
bad to be ambitious, right? So again, I'm totally skirting your question by not giving a specific instance, but I'm thinking more generally about how it wasn't until, well into my 30s, that I think I realized like, oh yeah, I was this person, and I'm only now coming back in
Yep.
to become that person again. So in a way, I felt like I really gave away my power for most of my teenage years, as many girls do.
Yes.
And I feel, and I'm so happy. Like, I'm in such a great place in my life in my 40s, and I'm loving it. And I'm like,
Yep.
aging is amazing. Like, I have
Yeah.
no interest in being in my 20s again because of all of the reasons that we're talking about.
Yes.
Because I am stepping, I reclaim that power. I'm like, oh hell
Hmm.
no, this is who I am.
Yeah.
And not only do people appreciate this, I appreciate this. I
Yeah.
like this. So
No, I love it. I love it. And you're so right, because I think that that happens, and we don't really even step back into our power for a long time, because I remember, I was always very driven, outspoken, like I needed to be the best in the room at all things. And then realized in my teenage years, like it's like, oh well, boys don't like it when you beat them at things, and when you're smarter than they are, and when you're more driven than they are, and so I think all the way through my 20s, I even sadly got married when I was trying to be that, I'm going to meet you in the middle and be that happy medium, and bring down the tone and bring down my ambition, and I'm just going to softly walk in that. And then it was like in my mid 30s, I was like, this is not who I freaking am, like this is not who
mm.
I am. And
Oh
then it,
yeah,
it
relationship.
became, yeah, it became really clear that um I could stay in the marriage and be who I wasn't, or be who I really am and be happy. And that's kind of where I'm at now. So,
Yeah.
so, but
Yes.
yeah, it's hard, because you're so right. I mean, we really do come to a realization in our teenage years, when insecurity hits, that like, oh wait, I'm not supposed to be this way. And boy, I tell you,
Yeah.
nothing can ruin you more than being somebody you're not, or trying to pretend
Yeah.
like you're
Yeah.
not ambitious and you're not successful and you're not smart. So I love that.
Hmm.
I love that. So who inspires you?
Mm. Who inspires me? Gosh, so many people. This is super corny, but it's honestly the first person that came to mind is my
Yeah.
mother.
Oh,
And I think, and she's just, I because she's kind. I mean,
yeah.
I think it's kindness that I think, we talk about being ambitious and bossy, and so, and I think that the perfect pair to that is also being humble and kind, right? Like
Yes.
which is so possible. I think that's the thing is, again, talking about ambitious being a dirty word, as though if you're ambitious, it also means that you're unkind or you're relentless or you're
Yeah.
competitive. And I'm
Cutthroat.
really none of those
Yeah.
things. Exactly.
Yeah.
So I think that, and loving me and believing in me and, doing the same for my granddaughter and, just, I mean,
Yeah.
her granddaughter, not my
Right, right.
granddaughter.
So
Not,
to say you're
not
too
yet.
young.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So, she's a huge inspiration to me. I mean, um, yeah, I think, more generally, like all of the mentors I've ever had in my life and in women particularly, but including men, like,
Yeah,
the
absolutely.
good male mentors who were like, who stood up for me, who could be, more than just mentors, but advocates. Because
Yes.
often, there's this great article. It's, I think it's called Women Are Over Mentored and Under Sponsored, and it
Yes.
talks
Oh
about
my
how
gosh.
we have lots of mentors, but often, the women who are mentoring us haven't gotten to the position of power where they can also actually advance us in a way. So sometimes it helps to have a sponsor who is someone who is in that most powerful position, who can then say, oh no, this is the person I want to speak to, right? So,
Yeah.
I think all of the mentors and the sponsors and the advocates, I again, I feel like I'm giving you really broad answers because I don't have a
It's very
single.
attorney of you.
I
Just kidding.
know, right?
No, I love it. I love it. No, you're right, because I think it's one thing to advise and to mentor, but it's a whole other thing to really advocate for, right? And
Yeah,
sometimes women just aren't in a position to advocate for other women, but men are. And I
yeah,
applaud those men who step up and say, yes, we're advocating for this woman because she deserves this seat at the table, right? And so
absolutely.
I
Yeah,
love it.
yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Cannot agree more. So I've really enjoyed this conversation. I have one more question for you. What do you wish more people knew?
Mm. Wow. Another really great question. Huh. What do I wish more people knew? Um, you really stumped me on this one.
And it's
You
just in
know, I,
general.
yeah, I mean, I feel like this is going to be cliched and corny again, but, um, I, so I have been incredibly fortunate to spend a lot of time in other parts of the world,
Mm,
in places where, I was the outsider. And I think, being white in America, often we don't have that experience, right?
sure.
And going to a country where, no one looks like you and everyone stares at you and you're always going to be an outsider. Like you can't hide it. You know what I mean?
Of course.
Is an incredible experience in terms of putting yourself in other people's shoes.
Mm,
And I feel like it's something that many people don't ever get to experience. And I think that we do have a major lack of empathy and understanding, around the world of other
yeah.
people, right? And a lot of it is just because we have never had that experience. And I think maybe if I wish people knew that, like, everyone has been in your shoes before. Everyone that you encounter has been in your position, you've been in their position in some way before, right?
Right.
And it's so easy for us to, and I do this myself as well, to sort of villainize other people, or to see somebody as an other and just think we have nothing in common, or we would never,
Right.
and that's just not the case. Like
Right.
we really are all
Right.
human.
Yep.
And even people who have ideas that are totally distasteful to us, they have also slipped in the shower, and they also probably have a mother that they love, or a child that they love, or a dog that they love. And
Yeah.
we do have this commonality that we're increasingly losing. I think the even while we're able to travel and interact much more, at the same time we're pushing each other away in a way that we're never
Yeah.
able to really, like, understand that the commonalities among us. And so, you know I guess I wish that was an experience and a feeling that more people had, knowing, that we do all share a lot of commonalities, even among people who seem very different from us.
Absolutely. We have way more in common than we have differences, but we somehow focus on the differences, don't we? So I feel like that's something we need to get through is, focusing on our commonalities and the similarities between us. I mean, it doesn't matter where you're from, what race you are, where, how you grew up. We have so much more in common than we have difference. And I was explaining that actually to a group of people today when they were asking about the podcast. I said, the reason I do this podcast, I said, not everybody can be successful, but we have all experienced challenges. And so, talking about the challenges is the commonality. That's the common ground. We have all experienced incredible challenges, and we have all had to, kind of grind through things that really just are devastating and beat us down. And that is the commonality. That is our common ground. And if we can focus on that relates us, right? That we are connected. And so while not everybody has experienced tremendous success, we have all experienced tremendous heartache and tremendous loss. And that is our commonality, right? And so that's why I kind of bring up some things that are challenging, talk about some challenges, because that's where the connection happens, right? So anyway.
Oh, that's absolutely beautiful and well said.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Our failures unite us.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I mean, that's the one thing that we've all been through, right? Like nobody has come out and be like, life has been fantastic. I've never experienced anything bad. I don't know what you're talking about. Like, okay, whatever. So yeah.
Never been rejected.
Oh, never.
Never
Sunshine
been embarrassed.
Nope. So, well, I really, really, really enjoyed our conversation. I have just loved talking with you, and I've gained so much insight, and I just applaud you and wish you incredible success in what you're doing. And I know that if anyone can help make this 2%, 25%, it's you. So,
Thank you,
I
Angela.
know you are on the right track, and we've got the right person, kind of looking out for our funding internationally. So thank you so much for all that you do.
Oh, well, thank you. And for your listeners and for this fantastic podcast. And I look forward to hearing many more of your interviewees.
Absolutely. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us for another episode of the Pretty Powerful Podcast. And thank you to Martha for joining us again. And if you want to find out more about her, please go to prettypowerfulpodcast.com, and she will, all of her links will be there as well. And I will make sure that there is a link to NGOsource so that people can check out that as well. So thank you again, Martha Lackritz-Peltier, and I hope everyone has an amazing day.
Thank you for joining our guests on the Pretty Powerful Podcast. And we hope you've gained new insight and learned from exceptional women. Remember to subscribe or check out this and all episodes on prettypowerfulpodcast.com. Visit us next time. And until then, step into your own power.